Hi, I'm Stephanie McKeith, host of the Theta Living Show, and I was lucky enough to interview Dr. Nasha Winters. She is a naturopathic oncologist, and we went a little overboard on this interview. I like to keep my shows brisk, bright, and bold. We totally blew it on the brisk part, but we sure nailed the bright and the bold. If I could be anybody's tail, it would probably be Dr. Nasha's because she is so full of so much good information that pertains to everybody and anybody. A naturopathic oncologist, she connects the tie between the patient and their conventional oncologist. She helps the conventional oncologist what tests to run, how to look at them, how to adjust treatments and plans and protocols, and it's just an incredible piece that we've been missing for so long that we need to expand more on, and we need more people to understand that this does exist. I will tell you, we had no intentions of discussing the COVID. However, that's what everybody's talking about. And that's what everybody wants to hear. So that's kind of where we went for this show. It's affecting everybody. If you have a cancer diagnosis, then a lot of people consider that a crisis. They're dealing with a cancer crisis amidst the COVID crisis, and that's a big deal. It's a huge weight, challenge, trauma to work through. So we talked about it, but we also talked about how this is affecting everybody, including her and her licensure. So that's another tidbit you're going to get out of this interview. And if you have any questions or comments or concerns, I want to hear them. So please send me a message, reach out to us, let us know. If you need to get in contact with Dr. Nasha, her contact information is in the show. Otherwise, reach out to me and I can get that to you. But this is going to be the first part of the Dr. Nasha interview series. Maybe I'll make it a series, but for right now, it's a show. So we talked about the cancer crisis amidst the COVID crisis, and I'm going to be interviewing her again because, like I said, if I could be anybody's tail, it would be hers. Can't wait to hear what you think about this. Dr. Nasha Winters. Hi. So
Oh,
the big concern, which I didn't want to get into, but we're going to get into because that's what everybody's into right now, is the COVID crisis. But we
yeah.
are speaking to a very narrowed population. We've got people who are looking to support their health, to regenerate their well-being, to clean up the terrain, which you'll talk about. So we've got a COVID crisis amidst a cancer crisis. And this, of course, this topic is not the common conversation. It's
Right.
not what people are talking about. This is not going to drive any fear. It's not going to scare anybody. It's not going to shake your tail feathers. So it's not going to make its way into the mainstream enough to be talked about. So it's so to me it's so important to pull out all of those golden nuggets out of the beautiful Dr. Nasha's brain to share with everybody, because sometimes we just need a dose of common sense in the middle of a crisis, right?
Absolutely. Like you want to keep a level head in the time of crisis. And that's why emergency doctors, room doctors are so good at what they do because they can stay very clear and focused in a time of crisis, which we need a few of those walking around on this planet right now.
Mm-hmm. So regardless, we're not going to get into maybe the origin or
Right.
conspiracies or controversies. We're going to talk about it, but we're not going to talk about the dramatic part that's dividing families and dividing cities and dividing nations and communities, because the whole intention here is to bring people together with connection through community to build that even stronger so that people like us can embrace you and walk you
Yeah.
through and guide you what you really need to be looking at. Dr. Nasha is always looking through metabolic lenses when it comes to things like this. So fear, panic, worry, those are all pretenses to a problem, right?
Absolutely. I mean, when you think about health in general, cancer in particular, infectious disease in particular, one of the things that is well validated and evidenced in our scientific method and is agreed upon by every clinician and every scientist I have ever met, including infectious disease specialists from around the world, we can all absolutely agree that probably the worst possible thing you could expose yourself to would be anxiety, fear, terror. And yet we are definitely swimming in it right now, intentionally or non-intentionally. And even if you're someone who sort of prides yourself on not getting sucked into that vortex, which is very seductive, thanks to all the media that's coming at us again and again, and our well-meaning loved ones who have, some reason for concern that just got to get caught up in that sort of whirling dervish energy of it all. Even when you're someone who considers yourself strong and immune to those experiences, you're still feeling the impact of other people's fear and anxiety in, on, and around you. So I think it's quite fair to say that we're all sort of touched by it. If you're not directly feeling it within your body, you're being exposed to it from other people around you. Our physical space does not end right here. It extends, some people say 3 feet, 6 feet. Some people say universe, it expands out there. So that being said, I think it's one thing we could all agree on is that stress makes all of this worse. And fear, of course, leads to stress. And stress response in our body has a different outcome in each of us individually by the way we were wired, by our epigenetics, by what we were born with. So some of us come into this world a little bit more of a warrior, resistant, resilient. We can handle a lot of adversity coming to us and we can sort of face it, meet it head on, and thrive beyond it. In fact, some of us do thrive on that type of stress response in our chemistry. And then you'll have others who get absolutely paralyzed by it, who absolutely get gripped and contracted and inwardly like collapsing in on themselves. And that leads to one level of isolation and separation. And then you get others who get that experience and they lash out of terror. It's like a wounded animal cornered in your backyard. It's going to fight to the death. And it doesn't often come from a very rational place. So you sort of see these places of sort of the focus, like, here's the problem. What is the solution? Staying kind of even keeled. And then you have sort of the shut down version, and then you have the overreactive version. That is the example of what's happening in our immune system. Okay, we have this teeter-totter of the immune system. And I've talked about this in a lot of different conferences. So this is a perfect place to start. We look at the teeter-totter and we look at each end of the teeter-totter. So on one end of the teeter-totter in immunology, you have what's known as Th2, which is the T helper cell 2 category, which is, for the most part, when that's activated, that's where you mostly see cancer. Okay. The other side of that teeter-totter is the Th1, the T helper cell 1 portion of the teeter-totter, and that's the autoimmunity. That's the attack inward on itself. And the cancer is the expansion outward attack, that's like all the resources being taken in, the growth, the proliferation, that's that outward yang movement. And then the autoimmune is that inward attack process. When I talked about that center kind of focus, like, okay, what's the problem? What's the solution? Where are we? That's the center of our teeter-totter, which is known as the T helper cell 3. And that's the place where it keeps the balance between the moments when we need to overexpress outward and we need to inward, collapse inward, right? So there are variations. We need elements of both in our immune system and our function in this world. Sometimes you have to react strongly to a bee sting. Sometimes you do get suppressed enough with a condition that your immune system no longer works and you get a cancerous process. Or sometimes you get activated in an immune process that's overactive and starts to attack you, back on you. And so that center sort of, balancing act, sort of the orchestrator, the conductor of the orchestra is right there in the middle we can focus on. So instead of us talking about who's right, who's wrong, the outward expression, total fear mongering, outward expression people, that's not right or wrong. Just like the people who collapse in or terrified and are like completely in the inward attack and the collapse inward, that's not entirely right or wrong. Somewhere in between is the balance. And That's where you and I are going to focus our time on today, because it's easy to get more polarized if you try and, you know, speak to either end of that spectrum. You're going to trigger somebody at the opposite end of the spectrum. So instead of focusing on that, just like I do when I'm working with patients and teaching physicians how to work with patients with a cancer diagnosis, this is precisely how we're going to talk about how best to shore up yourself in this time of crisis, the COVID crisis, et cetera. So that's where I thought I'd kind of give you a little foundation of where we're going to be focusing, the center of the teeter-totter people, and we can clarify anything in what I just started the conversation on.
So, with that said, now to expand a little bit further, when somebody who has a cancer diagnosis, which is mainly the audience that we're speaking to,
Yep.
should they be more concerned? Why are we so afraid of the COVID versus cancer, or I have cancer? Why should I be 1,000 times more concerned than somebody else? What are we looking at when it comes to protecting ourselves? Is there a list? Because I see all kinds of, everybody's an expert. And I see all kinds of experted lists all over the internet and all over social media. And should I have vitamin C and B17 and zinc and all of these things on hand, or am I looking at the balance of that teeter-totter that you were explaining, regardless of what crisis we're dealing with?
Thank you. And this is such a fun conversation for me, because for the past 2 years, my co-author for my first book, The Metabolic Approach to Cancer, Jess and I have been working on a second book. And it's pretty much done outside of a few final pieces to the puzzle. And it's timely that we didn't knock it out quickly like we hoped to. We were hoping to get it done by the end of last year. I'm so grateful that we didn't now, because we're actually kind of repurposing the book in a way that now, when my first book came out and the second book, what was coming out, is there's a lot of people waking up to the concept of the terrain, or of the center of that teeter-totter we're talking about. But it's not sexy and compelling, and it's not really provocative enough for a lot of people, right? And a lot of people think, that's not my problem. I don't have to worry about that, right? Even though 50% of us will, by the way, at some point in our lifetime, for World Health Organization and NCI and American Cancer Society. But neither here nor there, that was still apparently not compelling enough to get people's attention. Also, when we've had a lot of crises in the past of different viruses and whatnot that have impacted us, they've happened in sections of the world. And again, it was like them and us, not going to bother, not going to affect me. We see that a lot in the cancer world as well. Like, it's a problem for my neighbor having cancer, but I don't have to worry about cancer because I'm healthy. Everyone thinks they're healthy until they get cancer, right? Which we'll come back to here in a moment. So what I think is so interesting is Jess and I have kind of gone back to the drawing board, and actually the name, so know this, it's trademarked and we're in the whole thing here, but the name of the book is Pandemic Proof. And it's literally, so we've reframed it, because here's the irony. Suddenly a virus that affects far less people annually than does obesity, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, cancer, suddenly that's what's gripping us. That's what's getting our attention. And part of that is because it's a global experience. We are all part of this global consciousness in real time, all together. It does not discriminate. It does not, it's like, it's everywhere. So for the first time, probably in human existence, we are all experiencing something at the same time. Now, the crazy part is all those other things I just listed off have also been experienced simultaneously at the same time, and yet it does not make headlines. It does not have that same sort of sexiness to it. When we look at just in the United States alone, more than 1,600 people die every single day of cancer. That's just cancer. And no one's talking about that. So what Jess and I are doing in this book is helping compel people to understand that you can be pandemic proof for life against chronic illness and co-infections, and that you need to understand how and why you got there, what responsibility you have to take yourself out of there, and how to fortify yourself and individualize how you need to fortify for yourself this moment forward. So as we started before the conversation, before we started recording, I said, when I start to talk about accountability, personal responsibility, people get triggered because they assume that I'm blaming them for their condition. But here's the reality. You don't know what you don't know until you know. But then once you do know, it frankly is your fault. And that really also pisses people off. So excuse me for that. But once you know, wow, I have a lot more power over how I thrive, over how I heal, over how I live on this planet for whatever time frame I'm given, than I've ever been led to believe. And so that's where I want, that's like, again, when I'm always talking to my cancer patients, I'm explaining to them, here's where you came from, here's how you got here, and here's what it's going to take to get you out of this mess. And it requires a full overhaul of everything, a full audit of your home, of your relationships, of your work, of your own attitude, belief systems, and behaviors, of what you put in, on, and around your body, of what your neighbors put in, on, around their bodies, and your communities, et cetera. It branches out much bigger than us. And that's what's asking. This is what COVID and cancer ask of us. They are opportunities, they are messengers, and they start to point out our blind spots. They start to show us where we have gone off track and help illuminate us back to the path. And so when you look at the statistics worldwide right now, somewhere, depending on which news media you're looking at, 86 to 96% of all people facing a challenge with the COVID crisis, be it moderate to extreme symptomology, to even life-threatening or even life-taking outcomes, that population is almost exclusively based on the same exact statistics that are killing us today on the planet, meaning the diseases of chronic illness, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, cancer, Alzheimer's, obesity. These are the chronic illnesses that take our life today. And all as COVID is doing is taking advantage of those comorbidities, those other disease conditions. And no one's asking, well, why? Why is this a problem? That's what you and I are asking people to step into. Let's look under that. Let's look underneath that. Let's lift the rug, and take a peek underneath and see what the common denominator is. And that common denominator is our metabolic processes. It's the choices of fuel sources we're using to make this body do its thing. It's the people, places, and things we put ourselves constantly in front of or around. So we talked about the stressors being a driver of this. We talked about maybe lack of, let's look at the basic things. If you don't move your body, you're not oxygenating well. We know this is a disease of perfusion problems. We know that people die because they're not oxygenating their tissues appropriately. So they start to basically break down their vasculature until it comes and damages the heart and lungs. And we were thinking it was more of a pulmonary crisis like you see around pneumonia, which was starting at the pulmonary, but we're finding it's happening more in the vasculature. Now, when it happens more in the periphery, that is something that means that it's had to have been groomed for that for a very long time. Like, we don't break down our peripheral tissues quickly overnight. We do that with slow, insidious poisonings to our body, like glycosylated end products, for instance, which is the damaging effects of too much glucose and too much insulin circulating in the body, or that we've not been physically active enough or breathing enough. So we're not perfusing. So we're not getting good oxygen to all the tissues of our body. We're not keeping our blood pressure down by helping it pump. We're not keeping our lymphatics and our circulation in motion because we're stagnating like little cesspools sitting on the couch with our remote controls and our Mountain Dew. Those are the things that are affecting us. We're not moving through our grief, which affects our lungs, our grief and loss of what was or what should have been in our lives. And then we don't address those grief and loss very well. We medicate them with a variety of tools: sex, drugs, alcohol, food, shopping, whatever that may be, to heal that wound that never heals. And we might do that in a way that causes more harm and depletes us even further. And so I'm just trying to help people illuminate, like, where did this start? Did it start on the emotional level? Did it start on the perfusion level? Did it start on the sugar, like rusting and oxidizing your tissues level? Usually it's a combination of those things. It's not typically a single source, just like cancer is a combination of hundreds of disease processes that have accumulated over time. And by the time it's big enough and loud enough to get a diagnosis, it has been brewing in your body on average of 7 to 10 years, just like COVID. It's not like you woke up, you're like, oh, great, my neighbor had it, now I have it, and now I'm screwed, or now I'm, terrified that I'm going to have it. What have you been feeding into this terrain, this container that the COVID could come in contact with? Because guess what? We have viruses and microorganisms, and bacteria and fungi and mold around us all the time. And if it was enough that was the fault of those external triggers, we'd all be dead, or we'd all be in the hospital, or we'd all be in trouble. So why is it that some of us can be exposed? Like an example we talked about, I have many patients diagnosed with cancer in homes, in environments where they have loved ones in their home that are directly dealing with COVID, that are absolutely, being hospitalized or dealing with severe symptoms, or struggling for their own lives right now. And yet, interestingly enough, the patients that I have supported through this process who are exposed to it, are knowingly diagnosed with it, they're tending to have lower, if any, symptoms, so mild to no symptoms at all, and recover quicker, or don't get it at all, even if they show positive antibodies. So why is that the case when theoretically our most vulnerable populations would be our cancer patients? If you're a standard of care cancer patient and you are just being a slug on a rock and letting them do everything to you, and you're not stepping into the driver's seat and driving this car your way down the highway, of course you're going to be vulnerable, because every single thing they're putting into your body makes all of those conditions worse. It changes your nerve endings. It glycosylates you even further, so rests you out even further. It causes more mitochondrial and metabolic damage, the actual treatment of cancer itself. It weakens and suppresses your immune system. It actually, it changes your psychology of how to deal with what's coming at you. It puts you in a place of victimhood versus empowerment. And of course, those populations are vulnerable. But the type of patients that I have the privilege of working with, and that I've trained other physicians to work with, and that you have the privilege of coaching through this, Stephanie, is that these are folks who are absolutely taking back the control. They're grabbing the reins. They're looking under the hood, and they're finding out of the 10 pathways, the 10 different terrain 10 issues that can affect you, from your epigenetics to your metabolic sugar intake, to your microbiome, to your toxicant exposure, to your immune system, to your inflammatory process, to your circulatory processes, to your hormonal balance, to your stress response and circadian rhythm, and to your mental emotional well-being. Those are the terrain 10s that I'm always exploring with every one of my clients. We look for their blind spots. We look at the priorities. We shore those up first, and then everything starts to follow. Guess what? Those patients become resistant and resilient in the face of whatever chronic illness is coming their way, of whatever acute and chronic viral patterns, bacterial patterns are coming their way. And I will tell you over and over and over and over and over again, I have patients telling me I am healthier now with cancer than I was ever before. It's the same thing with any of our patients dealing with chronic illness. When they are taught to become aware of things they didn't know before, it changes all the outcomes. And they then also start to recognize, yep, I probably shouldn't have overdone it on Memorial Day weekend with my family and friends, too many margs, whatever. So what can I do to clean that up? So I was a good example of this, returning back from Mexico in the time of COVID crisis, border crossings, driving through some sketchy parts of Sonora, coming back here with my 2 dogs, my cat, my livelihood of 6 months in the back of a pickup truck, driving crazy 11, 12-hour days where we would end the day, frankly, with a bowl of French fries and guacamole and a margarita at hand, things that my husband and I do not normally ingest on a regular basis. When we got back, we were both like, oh, everything hurts. Everything feels yucky. I'm just kind of mucusy. I don't feel good. 5-day fast later, we are rebooted. We are reset. Our immune systems are charged. We're back on. Our clothes fit better. All the inflammation is off. My rings come and go easily. We feel sharp as a tack again. And we recognize, okay, we know what it feels like when we go slightly off, but we also know what it feels like when we're spot on in the center of that teeter-totter. And it feels too good to want to be on either end of that teeter-totter for very long.
So a life lesson of cancer could be the same as the life lesson of COVID. So when I go into the grocery store and all of the organic section is nicely stocked, I can get whatever produce I want. I can pretty much fill up my cart and then look to the person, wherever I'm at, to the left or to the right, in front, behind, wherever. They are stocked full of canned goods, preserved food, bagged food, processed food, and we are not looking at what the lesson here is of COVID. We are so overconsumed with the threat and the fear and the emotional turmoil. It's causing us to strip the shelves of the crap food that is contributing to all of the contributors to cancer and all of the contributors to being vulnerable to this COVID-19. It's a life lesson to be learned, and what we need to look at is a standard American paradigm shift.
It's not America, it's a worldwide, because we've
right.
built our bad influence. We've like poured our guts literally all over the rest of the world, that they're falling victim to our same poor choices.
Yeah.
Cultures and environments where, when I first went to India in 1992, it was like, yeah, people had diabetes. You'd hear about it. You never heard about cancer. In fact, what I was learning at that time was very, very rare to see in that area. Mm-hmm. I went back in 2003. So a full decade, with some pocket change later, there is diabetes, awareness everywhere, and cancer is on the massive rise. Today, I see entire families. So I see entire families from the Chennai region or the Mumbai region, or, I've got lots of families come see me. So a really good example is two sisters that are, one's in her early 30s, one's in her late 20s, a mother and a father, who they came to me when their mother was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. While we were supporting the mother in this, the daughters got hip to looking at under the terrain for themselves, because one of them had some symptoms of a breast lump and thought she'd do a little further workup. And what they were learning with what I was uncovering with their mother, they thought, we don't want to be on this path with my mom, so we'll do our own looking. Guess what? One of them ended up having breast cancer. The other one had a precancerous lesion. So it was like, well, while we were figuring that out for them, it's like, good, we caught it early enough that we're starting to make the changes as a whole of the family. The father, 6 months into the support of the mother, gets diagnosed with hepatocellular carcinoma.
Oh, no.
The entire family have these things in common. Vitamin D levels, non-existent. Like, I've never seen, we're talking single digits of vitamin D. That right there is an all-cause mortality problem. So if your listeners aren't checking their own vitamin D levels, that is a first start for you.
Regardless of what we're talking,
whatever you're dealing with,
COVID, all of it.
Yeah. All of it. Number two, they all had no B12, none, like crazy. So we're talking one of the most important ways that you methylate all the things you're being exposed to on this planet. The reason being is because from a cultural perspective, they were long life vegetarians. But what they forgot is that of the millennia, their country of origin has been eating pulses and grains and pulses. So basically beans and legumes as their protein source. They've all become non-mobile. They are no longer the physically active culture they'd always been. And they've bastardized the food source. So now all the food is, now we're adding extra sugar to those pulses in everything they create. They love their packaged processed foods. They've moved away from ghee as their main fat source and coconut oil to corn oil and soybean oil because of industry in their country. All of the grains and legumes that they ingest today are contaminated with glyphosate, which is a massive endocrine disruptor, known carcinogen. Their environments are being massively sprayed now with pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, anti-mosquito, the stuff that's toxic that we won't even let in this country anymore. Instead of using neem and some of the traditional ways of dealing with pest control for millennia previous. And now we're looking at a population that diet that they thrived on for millennia is now killing them. So there's that. Low zinc, okay? Low selenium, low magnesium, low vitamin K2. Most of those are because they have a diet that's now so void in nutrition and the food has been so bastardized. And what little bit of protein, animal protein they might get from the dairy is now factory farmed and no longer wild. They don't have their own cow anymore to get their own milk, make their own pannier. So it's all dead, right? So those sources of vitamin D, vitamin K, vitamin A, selenium are no longer available to them. And the glyphosate acts like, so they call glyphosate of the soil aids of the soil. It's the cause of complete destruction and manipulation and malnourishment of the soil. And it chelates all the minerals out, which means all of those important cofactors, magnesium, zinc, selenium, are now gone from their diet as well. So now they are literally stripped bare bone. There is no DNA protection. You must have B12, and selenium is the protector of the genome, right? It's not there anymore. They're even more, dealing with more glycemic load than ever before, because now sugar is added to an already high sugar, high carbohydrate diet, and their bodies don't know how to deal with it, and they're not moving it to deal with it. So you're looking at cultures that have been, for millennia eating a certain way, and it doesn't work for them anymore because of what we've done to the food source. The wake-up calls are what's happening here. We are looking at populations going extinct right now. In my backyard of Durango, Colorado, we have several Indian reservations, and it is it makes me so sad. It brings up such emotion for me to see this unbelievable, like, wildfire of COVID going through and wiping out an entire population of ancient peoples, the Dene, the Navajo. And it's horrible. Every single day I'm seeing posts of people I went to college with, people I've known, people I've worked with for years in that region dying, because it's also one of the most vulnerable populations, because they have gotten so far away from the genetic match of the way they lived and ate and prayed and worked on this planet, that their bodies, it's like their genetics don't even recognize the world they live in today, which has made them so vulnerable to all of the sugar. They don't have the ability to metabolize sugar. It's not in their genetics. So there's epigenetic expressions of that. They don't have any outlet or resources to deal with the trauma of what they've been exposed to over generations, the epigenetic passing down of trauma after trauma after trauma. They are literally living in areas where there's still no running water and no electricity. So they can't have access to good quality hygiene. A mask is just silly. This is a culture of people that you have multiple generations living under one roof. And the next closest homestead is 50 miles away. And you have to hunker down as a collective, young with old. And they have to go out and get water resource and carried in the back of their pickup trucks in the middle of nowhere. And they can't wash their, and they can't protect themselves from grandma or whatever. So we're looking at cultures being wiped out because we as a culture, as a society, aren't taking care of the disenfranchised in this as well. We're not helping them meet the basic requirements of just basic living to be able to overcome this. And we're looking at vulnerable populations around the world where that's happening. And the cultures that are doing just fine, like where Steve and I just came back from, this is an area that's used to poverty and used to not having running water and electricity, but the community takes care of each other. Big difference there. But when you have literally put people on a reservation and shut them off from society and forgotten about them, they're dying now. And then we're trying to isolate them further from each other and from us. That's the nail in the coffin for most people. If we're already fragile in other aspects of our well-being, from the epigenetics and the metabolism and the hormones and the immune system, and then you throw isolation into the game, you kill people. Because how we thrive is through oxytocin, the hormone that is expressed and shared and potentiated by connection with another.
Connection and community, right?
100%. 100%. And so you can't have your 25 hugs a day quota to reach your natural daily infusion of oxytocin. Now we're terrifying people even further. We've scared people off the sunshine for years because of skin cancer. Now we're terrifying them to get out. Don't go outside because you might contaminate someone, or someone might contaminate you. We're taking an already vulnerable system and making it more vulnerable.
So I want to expand on two things that you said. The glyphosate, the pesticides, the herbicides, the fungicides are killing our terrain. We have to lay a higher level of importance on organic, non-GMO, clean foods, filling our carts full of canned, processed, crap food is going to make us a more vulnerable population to everything, every disease, not just cancer, not just COVID, everything, all of the precursors to cancer and COVID. We cannot possibly expect to be a healthy population if we don't eat right, right?
It's the foundation. It's like putting bad gas in your car. You might be able to putter down the road for a little bit, but it'll eventually sputter and die, right? That's us. And so as we age, we also mitochondrially age, which mitochondria, those little powerhouse energy sources within our cells that depend on us to feed them the fuel they require to function properly, they naturally start to age with all of us. But we age them faster with improper input, okay? Improper choiced input, and also improper not choiced input. You don't know, a lot of people don't know they live next to a factory or a Superfund site or getting poisoned by their water source. I mean, heck, you live in a state where some of the most toxic water in the world. If people are just depending on their Brita or their fridge, frankly, they just don't know better, that they're actually probably speeding up their demise because they're not taking it to the next step of a deeper filtration process that's required to get all of the things like lead and the other industries out of your water source, which are endemic in a lot of the Great Lakes areas. It's just terrible, Jay. We've poisoned our river basins. We've poisoned the Mississippi Delta. I mean, it's like if you're eating fish, you're drinking water, you're growing crops in those areas, you are poisoning yourself. Dr. Zach Bush did some amazing talks on this here of how like you can look from satellite photos, the algae blooms of what industry has done to us. Guess what? That vision from space, but he started doing this talk well before COVID started getting out there. I heard him do this exact talk in December in, oh gosh, where were we? I can't remember where we were for Acres conference this year. It was like Columbus or someplace. But anywho, he gave this unbelievable, powerful talk. And it's like what we're seeing now is like what we're seeing the satellites of the big algae blooms from the Delta Mississippi, the Delta River basins of being over pesticided that are creating all these mismanaged microorganisms. That's what COVID is in all of us. Mm-hmm. We are like a giant Delta River basin inside, making us a cesspool to become more vulnerable to these other blooms of our microbiota, which changes how we think and feel because our nervous system and our neuroendocrine system and our neurotransmitters are coming from our microbiome. Our immune system is predominantly coming from our microbiome. And so you're looking at these foods and these crops that have just been bastardized for so long since the Cold World War in the United States that we're not getting even life in our food. You have to go seeking that extra. What would take you a serving 50 years ago would take you 3 servings to have the equivalent of nutritional value today, right? And all the folks saying eat more grains, guess what sequesters glyphosate? Grains and legumes, and soy, which is a legume. And so even if you're like, well, I'm going to eat a vegetarian or a vegan diet, there's some of my highest levels of glyphosate out there, even organic, because guess what? Glyphosate doesn't read signposts. Right. Doesn't care if there's like a fence between it saying organic and non in commercial growth. It spreads 2 miles by air, soil, and water. Just look at the research and the data by people like Dr. Huber from Purdue and Stephanie Sinha from MIT. They're showing us that probably the biggest detriment to our world today, and likely has some impact on the COVID crisis, is glyphosate and Roundup and 2-DG, which is like the even more dangerous, ugly stepchild of glyphosate that no one talks about, because it's almost like glyphosate and Roundup are the smoke and mirrors to hide what's really behind it, the boogeyman that's really behind it. And so as we're kind of placating people to be like, oh yeah, we're taking care of that, we're taking that, they're like amping up the 2-DG, and they have to bring that up because now crops are Roundup resistant, so now they don't even respond to us. So you have to bring on a more potent toxic chemical. And what you said before, it's like, what is this teaching us? I mean, we can also look at satellite pictures and see how in a matter of weeks, as we've taken a break from some of the industries, as we've had to shut down factories and shut down massive farming, factory farming environments, you can see pockets changing around the world. And what freaks me out is all the people out there see, look, you stop eating it. I'm like, no, the same amount of animals are there. It's how we're processing it. If you actually took the animals and you started to bring them into the ecosystem in the way that our great-grandparents, our grandparents all did, and you start to regenerate the ecosystem, regenerate the soil, conserve the water, get it back into the rhythm of nature where we were all supposed to be, you change things drastically. And so what has happened, I alluded to this on what's happening on the Navajo Nation, we have all, the collective, globe right now, we've all gotten so far out of rhythm. We've all gotten so far from nature. We've all gotten so far from the matching of how our DNA was wired to what we should be eating and exposed to, and what type of physical activity we need, how much carbohydrate or how much fat or how much protein we need, dependent on that little blueprint that's come down from millennia through us. We're all trying to eat and do the same thing, be the same place. And we're trying to do it through a factoryized, non-natural environment that is just plaguing us over and over and setting us up for more vulnerability and more disconnect and more separation and segregation. And it's obvious in our religion, in our politics, in our medicine, in our education. I mean, everything. It's impacted every major part of infrastructure and humanity out there today. So I totally get fired up and passionate about this. And I wrote about it in a little blog last month. And this book that Jess and I have coming out later in the year will really dive much deeper in this as well. But we cannot keep putting our head in the sand, and we can't keep doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different outcome. And we have to, each and every one of us, step up to the plate and do our due diligence to take personal responsibility and accountability for ourselves, and then for our family members, and then for our neighborhood, and then for our community, and then our state, and then our planet. You have to keep going, because if you stay in your little lane, the world's going to die around you and you're just going to be left alone. If you get all the way out there to the end and don't take care of yourself first, that's a problem. It has to start like a little sprout and start to work its way outward to help educate and empower. And so it isn't, I mean, it's incredible. Steve and I have done this so many times by taking patients to a cancer retreat. So here's an example. From 4 p.m. on a Friday to 10 a.m. on a Monday, we would get labs before the patients came. I would look at their medical history. I would look at their current treatment plan, their current supplements. I'd get a 3-day diet diary. I'd also get a chronology of events in their life, significant events, whether it was trauma, whether it was the birth of a child, a divorce, whatever, in there. And then I'd look at their basic labs, a handful, very simple. CBC with differential, CMP, which is your metabolic panel, trifecta, CRP, LDH, and sed rate, a vitamin D3, a hemoglobin A1C, an insulin, and a TSH. That's what I got across the board for every patient before they came in. So I'd already have a sense of what their training was really about. I didn't really care about the diagnosis, the drugs, the treatment, the supplements, the diet. None of that mattered. I wanted to know how it was showing up in their physiology, because they didn't know. They're like, I'm healthy. Guess what? Not a single one. Not a single one was healthy. I've never seen a healthy set of labs ever until we've worked on it diligently. So I've never had someone just show me their labs and be like, look, and miraculously be fine. It doesn't happen on the planet anymore, right? But in those 4 days we talked about, 4 p.m. on a Friday to 10 a.m. on a Monday, we go in a deep dive. We show them the template of healthy living and healthy eating and healthy feeling and healthy, emotional intelligence, and dealing with the traumas and dealing with, how do I take this back into my home? How do I take this back to my community, my church? How do I take this back into my state? How do I then become, basically, we all have to become activists, right? For self and other. And at the end of that second week, when they would get home, so they'd have the 4 days with us, and they'd have a few days of kind of running with it at home. Plus they were able to plug into a little community, a little private Facebook forum where you could talk to each other and support each other. We look at their labs again. Within 2 weeks, we got to see, just like we're looking at satellite images of 2 weeks of taking a break from all the pollution of the car driving and the factories, we saw change. Immediate, objective, measurable metrics that showed people, look at what you are capable of doing in a matter of days. Now let's look at it 3 months from now, 6 months from now, a year from now, and then annually thereafter. And suddenly people are back behind the wheel, and it didn't matter what their disease state was, what the diagnosis was, because you can live a long, healthy life going close to 29 years with stage 4, right?
Yeah.
And live a great life with cancer. The goal is not to get rid of it. The goal is, how do I shore up my system so that because it is me, it's an extension of me. Cancer cells are in all of us all the time. So how do I keep them in harmony and synergy within my body and being? Not how am I going to kill it? How am I going to vaccinate it? How am I going to suppress it? That never works. It comes back and bites your ass harder time and time again if you keep going down that way. So instead, we empower people to know what makes them tick and know how to address it, know how to strengthen it. And so I was telling you before this, Steve and I are pretty sure we're waiting to get an antibody test done, but we're pretty sure we were exposed to this. And, 3 days in my way of healing, when I have a healing crisis, I go into a hardcore fever. That's been my MO since my cancer diagnosis. And I think it's why I'm here. And I let that baby burn. And I know when I hit 102.5, I know it without even a thermometer because I have the same hallucination I had when I was a little kid when I was given codeine during the chicken pox with a high fever. And it's the Velasic pickle stork. Okay, he's chasing me on ice skates, has the same visual. He still looks like the cartoon character of my youth. And he's still chasing me in slow motion with this weird music sound in the background. And I start to have the hallucination of that when my fever gets above 102.5. And my husband will laugh. I'm like, a pickle stork. Like, keep going. It also, like the chatters, like going into it was 3 days. I don't remember much of it. 3 days of fevering. And I just kept saying to him, unless my urine starts to turn black and unless I can't communicate in any way, don't intervene. Let it just bring me hydration, bring me a hydration, bring me a hydration. If I had an IV bag, I would have hooked myself up to then for fluids, but I didn't have that. So instead, I have little Quinton sips, these little hypertonic Quinton sips I take for when I always take down to Mexico in case somebody gets a little bit of Montezuma's Revenge. I have a great oral means of rehydrating the electrolytes. So I was taking several of those. That's how it hit me. 3 days later, I felt like I had the biggest upgrade ever. My husband ended up getting a different variety of it. We called it the baby COVID. So he got this weird purpley toes. He got the rash on the inside of his legs, bilateral. He started having weird oxygenation levels. He has a different constitution than I. And he started throwing it out both ends of his body. TMI, no. And it was amazing. We've been together for almost 30 years. I've literally counted twice that I've seen my husband throw up. And this was exorcism throw up. Like this was pretty amazing. And it hit him in that way from the GI tract. And we both popped through it, honestly, to God, better than ever. And we're like, well, that was interesting. And we didn't suppress him. We'd watch each other and we're medically inclined. So we knew what to watch for, got through it. And for us, what was leading up to it was some extreme stress. We were in some extreme stress places. Our diets and lifestyles were still pretty dang good, but we were not tending to our mental, emotional health and our stress response the way we needed to. It recommitted us to our daily exercise routine without fail. It recommitted us to our meditation exercise every single day without fail. It recommitted us to our mental, emotional work we needed to work on individually and as a couple in a way that we were like, we will not neglect that again. That's what happens. These are the opportunities that come to us and say, what else have you been blind to? What else have you been putting the sticker on the check engine light on your dashboard to for too long that needs your attention now? And it's incredible what we've accomplished since that 6-7 weeks ago, going through that. So much is realigned in our life and pathed our way, because you and I talked also, we've all had to pivot in this time. My entire income dried up of how I speak globally. And, I'm grounded here in a garage that's been converted to a studio apartment because we rented out our house long-term because I was supposed to be basically on an international, landscape several times a month for the next 6 months. So we've had to repurpose and redo this too. It's an invitation, and we could be victim to it, or we can embrace it and empower it and restructure it for the good for ourselves. And it sometimes has harder days than not. I'm not going to kid you. It's not like it's a kumbaya and rainbows and butterflies, but it's definitely inspiring. Like, what can we do to make the best of this situation? What can we do to shore up our resilience? What can we do to support and enhance and educate other people to do the same?
So back to that group of people in Mexico.
Yeah.
The main point that sticks out to me is that you mentioned that the community comes together and they take care of everybody in the community. So what concerns me the most out of this COVID-19 right now is that people are taking this fear and this worry, and they're allowing division to set in, division amongst friends, amongst family, amongst communities. And community and connection are two of the most critical factors to a thriving life. Whether you're diseased or not, you can't find happiness or health or any of the above if you don't have that, and when we separate that and take that out of the equation for so long, and we get ornery and snippy, and we start bickering, and relationships are just destroyed. What concerns me is, just like cancer, you don't wake up one day, go to the doctor, and then, darn it, I was healthy until I went to the doctor today, now I have cancer. You don't fall victim. Real life, my dog's barking. You don't fall,
There it is. Yeah.
you don't fall victim to the COVID because you've been eating boxed macaroni and cheese. I mean, that's part of it. That's why you're not falling victim. You've created it. So it's that level of responsibility that we are separating ourselves from. So what, 2 to 3 years, when we start to see cancer diagnosis rates on the rise, are we going to be able to look back to this time and think, what was I doing with my emotional state? Was I worried? Was I scared? Was I pissed off at my family and not, and
Yeah.
keeping my distance when
Yeah.
perhaps it had been 6 months down the road? Like, where is this taking us?
Totally. Well, and that's where, like, for your listeners now to understand the power of their thoughts, their emotions, and how you need to take charge of those, because you are in charge. No one makes you feel a certain way. Only you make yourself feel a certain way. So that's where work like by Bruce Lipton, Biology of Belief. That's where work by like Carolyn Mace. She's actually been doing some really beautiful free kind of live podcasts and things lately that have been really powerful about how to redirect this information. People like Joe Dispenza and his work. But one of my favorites, old classic, Dr. Lawrence Lashan. And here's a man who wrote a book called Cancer as a Turning Point. And it really could be called COVID as a turning point, or chronic illness as a turning point. I really recommend this as a reader for your followers, because it has a great workbook in the back that helps you start to take a good inventory and self-audit of how your emotional intelligence is, and maybe what you were suppressing in your emotional body and being that needed to be expressed, or needed to be altered, or needed to be tended to in a different way. And that's what he's a famous researcher who was the man who found that 6 months to 2 years prior to the actual diagnosis, despite that it was working its way insidiously in the physiology and the metabolic functionings of your biochemistry, it was a big life event, a big trauma event, 6 months to 24 months prior to your diagnosis, that often gets it big enough and loud enough and out there enough for us to go, oh yeah, where have you been hiding? So I, just like 9/11, 2 to 3 years after that, my practice exploded with cancer patients. And I was a full family practice. I had to start to pivot my whole practice and that time to focus entirely on cancer to keep up with the demand. Sadly, I think we'll see a very similar thing in a couple of years. I already know it. I'm already watching my patients who were already with me for a while doing this and consulting. I now consult with doctors on patients' behalf, but I'm watching the outcomes. The patients that had a head start at shoring up and addressing their terrain 10 imbalances and taking care of these things, they're the ones who are in a good place. It's the ones that are brand new to the table that this is a little overwhelming. And I'm watching numbers kind of bop around, and I'm watching figures go up. And it's really interesting because you can watch scans and markers go up with stress. And so when I do my check-ins, I have doctors, when I did this in private practice, and I have doctors today, I'm like, these are the questions I want to see. I want to see an example of your diet diary over the last few weeks. I want to see example of, since we last talked, what significant events were going on for you. Did you have did you have to do your daughter's wedding? Did you have a kid who's supposed to graduate but can't because the code, like, you start to look at your kids who've had it. Like, we just got off the phone with a good friend of ours today who's in extreme duress as their daughter, who went off to college this year, off from Durango, Colorado, back to, over to Oregon, is now back home and creating holy hell for everybody involved, because this isn't what she wants to do. And she's, of course, the only person on the planet who's experiencing this. And she's frankly a ratty little shit into her full family and all the people around, because she has not got that emotional maturity to recognize we're all in this together. No one, I guarantee your parents don't want you moving back home right now either. And yet, so how can we reframe it? So that's actually what we did our kind of a conference on today. Like, how do we make the best of this? Now we're all being pushed to do school online or to be homeschooled. Yeah. Some of us, an example here, may choose to stick with it because it actually may be a better choice for your children in the long run. And it may help you start to focus like the rest of the world, who has mostly 4-day work weeks and are required to take 6 weeks of vacation a year. Wouldn't that be cool? If we all got a 6-week vacation a year and shut down everything and watched the skies clear and the road, the air clear, which is one of the biggest triggers of brain cancer and lung cancer in the world today, wouldn't that be cool if we were all kind of forced under a 6-week quarantine every year just to clean up the environment, like an environmental detox annually?
Mm-hmm.
And wouldn't it be cool if we were allowed to really create our lives and our passions and our careers in a way that serves both us personally, the world as a whole, but also our families, because some of the biggest gifts are watching the recreation of relationships and communication with the families. So it's like there's such potential here. So I keep trying to help people, like, how will you use this information different? Because my biggest fear for every person listening, for every person on this planet, is we go back to the way it was.
Exactly.
And that is where we'll really spiral out of control, because now we've had a glimpse of something different. And when you try to go back to the environment that made you sick, I promise you it will make you sicker.
Mm-hmm. That's why I wanted to touch on this with you, even though this is not the topic I wanted to go over. But collectively, between both of us, we are both firm believers. And please realize, to everyone that's watching this, you cannot heal, transform, recover, or prevent anything in an environment that created the disease or allowed you to become sick in the first place. You have to take responsibility. You have to make these changes. And before we wind down, I just want to touch on the responsibility part. So I feel a responsibility to bring this kind of information to the table. It's the less traveled road. It's not what people want to talk about. Nobody wants to talk about taking responsibility.
They hate the messenger, my dear. I've been like rotten tomatoes and unbelievable troll attacks, and not fun.
Not nice messages, not nice memes, all of that stuff, right? So when we're getting those types of attacks, those are trolls and they want to hush you. There's a reason for that, and it happens to me a lot, and I know it happens to you as well. But we are the messenger of a different type of message that we're trying to bring out that requires a lot of responsibility, acknowledgement, and taking action for your own safety, future sake, your family's future sake. And it's so much different than what the mainstream is talking about. And there's a lot of people that know better but are not doing better right now.
Yeah. Well, here's interesting. Here's our teeter-totter again. Mm-hmm. Okay. So on one end of the spectrum, we have certain facets of media and political, realm that are expressing this extreme viewpoint. On the other end, you have another group expressing another extreme viewpoint. Frankly, there's elements of truth and lies in both of those camps. Sure. We have to keep going back to the center of that teeter-totter again and again. And I will use this as an example to tell you that even as innocuous as it is for me to tell people to do a personal inventory, take some tests, like a simple neutrophil to lymphocyte ratio, which is part of your CBC, a vitamin D level, look at your insulin levels, look at your inflammatory levels. Those are all great, tangible, measurable tools that other countries and other places have been sharing, saying these values, the patients that were sickest had these values that were out of range. So we could start to screen for people, know really who our higher, risk population are, and help themselves correct it. But I will tell you this right now, even in my own profession, I'm going to be bold and I'm going to probably get some people angry. I don't care. I now practice as a consultant for a reason, because under my medical license, I was handicapped to a lot of the things that I could be saying and doing to really help my patients thrive. I really much prefer the role as a consultant because I am a scientist, but I'm also I'm rational. I'm also an optimist, and I also am a critical thinker. And I think for myself, and I put together really well-validated metrics to test, assess, and address my situation and the outcomes. So I'm not coming from a place of dogma or guessing work or philosophy. I use data to inform my decisions. But I will tell you right now, my own profession has been in different states where naturopathic medicine is licensed. We are getting letters from our associations, basically threatening our licenses if we talk about this. Basically threatening our licenses if we say it's important for you to understand your terrain and start to do it differently. We've actually been told that we're not allowed to tell people that there's something they can do about it, that it's malpractice if we tell people that there are some things they can do for prevention, despite the fact that we have good evidence data to suggest otherwise. Our own licensures are threatening to take away our license. So if you end up going to a provider that you've loved and known for years and you trust them and they're telling you something that doesn't quite feel right, they may be also coming from a place of fear of losing an entire practice that they've spent years building up, simply because they have people watching, just like you were telling me before this. People are calling up like that's not wearing her mask and she's out gardening. You know, like there are trolls out there within our own population saying, I saw on Nasha's website that you talked about this, or this, or I saw on a Facebook Live that this person did this. They're even policing each other, which is bad. Now, granted, there are definitely some whack nuts on both ends of the spectrum, and some things are definitely flying out there. And I am very careful about talking about, but I'm talking about tangible, measurable, quantitative, and qualitative experiences and outcomes that are not just from opinion or philosophy or dogma, that we can do something about. And that is to test, assess, and address your own terrain, see what your risk factors are, and change them. It's that simple. And guess what? The nutrients that are out there, they're talking about, oh gosh, people with low D3, people with low B12, people with low zinc. Guess what? Those are also the nutrient deficiencies of people with cancer and all chronic illness, right? So it's not new to that environment. It takes a long time to get to that point. Your body is amazing how it keeps trying to shore it up for you and take energy, robbing Peter to pay Paul to keep things flowing. That's happening unbeknownst to you all of the time. And yet it's so easy to see the same people that are facing a worse outcome with COVID are also the same people that you have diabetes or cardiovascular disease or obesity or what. This isn't fat shaming. This isn't sure. This is the reality of the fact that 90 to 95% of all mortality on the planet today is preventable. And if you approach all of this as if you're preventing diabetes or obesity or cardiovascular disease or Alzheimer's or cancer, guess what? You're also going to be preventing COVID.
And
so that, and we can do something about it. Like you said before, you go to the grocery store and it's the perfect example. If you are still like, the fact that the produce is not completely wiped out astonishes me, and that it's rotting there on the shelves. And yet you can't find a frozen pizza to save your life, right? It's like that clue to that's the exact same thing that will kill you of a diabetes or cancer or cardiovascular disease as it would COVID. And so when people are stifling me and saying you can't say this, guess what? I've been hired 4 times to teach hospitals how to employ IV vitamin C in their hospital for treatment of COVID. I'm not allowed to talk about that for my profession. I have been in collaboration with people using hyperbaric oxygen and ozone therapy for these perfusion issues we talked about, which are what really are taking the life of these patients. Well vetted, standard of care. There's multiple clinical trials in big academic universities happening right now, but my profession says better not talk about that. No one wants to talk about the blood viscosity changes of being exposed to EMFs, like measurable metrics of, hey, I had these labs, they put in a brand new 5G network within 100 yards of my house, and now my labs look like this. This isn't conspiracy theory. This is the basics. You can go if people want to learn more. The EMF conference that was done in Santa Cruz in 2019, September 2019, dozens of experts in research and clinicians from around the world, not hooey wooey tinfoil wearing people here, folks. This is good data showing what's happening to our blood chemistry, to what's happening to our brain scans, what's happening to our perfusion levels, our oxygenation levels, what's happening to our blood sugars. We know that just even in the EMS, it's like creating diabetes and in grade school populations or grant. So these are things that sound like crazy conspiracy, but I implore you to get out of the sandboxes, either one end of the spectrum or the other of those unbelievable biased media outlets, and start to go to the sources yourself. Start to read, go to PubMed, start to go to Embase, EMBASE. This is the non-censored, basically, evaluation of clinical research from around the world. the US PubMed filters a lot of it. We're censored. We only
Yeah.
get anywhere from 40 to 70% of the data that's available worldwide. I also belong to a group called Meta, META. So I'm seriously filtering through hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of articles every single week with data compelling and backing and validating what I'm telling you here. This isn't hooey naturopathic gobbledygook. This is reality, folks, and we have to become made aware. Like I said, it's not your fault when you don't know, but you have to take it upon yourself to start to look. And when you do know, it's up to you to change it.
Can't do better until you actually know what's going on, right?
When you know better, you do better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you're dealing with a cancer crisis during this COVID crisis, you have to be able to take responsibility of what you have going on. We can't wait for the news to report on what's next and what you should do or what the new list is going to be that you should run out to the grocery store and supply your shelves with. Test, assess, and address. It doesn't matter what you're dealing with, right?
Exactly. And in fact, if you've had patients, if you were a patient dealing with cancer and you have been doing all these things and you have been cleaning up your system and digging under the, into the soil of you and learning about it, I guarantee you're probably healthier than the vast majority of the people around you, even with a cancer diagnosis. So if you don't believe me, test your own levels and find out and work with someone on my website. I just graduated 12 new doctors who went through my metabolic approach to cancer mastermind, who are stinking brilliant, well vetted, know how to have this conversation to help you test, assess, and address your own terrain. I also have a list of providers, which we should probably get you on there too, Steph, of vetted sort of patient coaches and advocates who understand how that these people I've worked with for years, who've gotten to my cancer retreats with me, and my patients have known and gotten to know very well, that are trusted resources for metabolic coaches and lifestyle coaches, and even people dealing with extreme emotional angst through this. So I've got some great therapists on there as well that I trust, that all work virtually. And there are more to come. We have a new class starting in September, and they'll be ongoing. We're building a hospital, a 250,000 square foot hospital that is integrative medicine, integrative cancer, and metabolic approach to cancer forward, where it takes the front row, not standard of care. And standard of care will be an option in the right tested environment in a re-envisioned, repurposed way, such as metronomic or chronobiologic, or the way it's timed with things. That is the wave of the future. And we're actively building it because the system is broken and we keep trying to infiltrate the system, but it keeps us broken. So instead we're like, screw it, we're going to go build our own. So these are the things that I'm done of coming up against other people's boundaries. I'm done of people telling me things can't be done when I just need to push them out of the way so I can keep doing it. Because that's been why I'm still alive here almost 29 years later. That's why all of these things are changing. So I care less and less and less as I get older. And as the truths keep burbling up for me about the trolls and the naysayers and the people trying to shut me down and quiet me down, because I lived it personally. And I've helped tens of thousands of people live this personally. And I'm now training doctors to help their tens of thousands of patients deal with this too. It's time. This is our time. I honestly feel like this is the best thing that could have ever happened.
Agree.
Cancer wasn't a big enough wake-up call, apparently. So Mother Nature had to throw us a curveball and give us something a little bit better that brought us a collective experience to say, it's time to change it up. Yeah.
But you got to shift the paradigm, people. drnasha.com.
Thank you so much. So much.
Thank you.
All the best, everything.
Cool. Yay.
Kind of went.
He's good at taking clips, but that's where everybody's at, though. So
yeah,
I know I'm all over the place, but it's when there's so much to cover that they need to focus right back down on the basics.
Yeah. The basic. It's the same. It's the same. You got a diagnosis of Alzheimer's or colorectal cancer or dementia or cardiovascular. It doesn't matter. It's all terrain and it's all metabolic and it's all the same source of that, banging up the poor mitochondria from poisons, from diet, from lifestyle, from genetics that came your way that you just ignored and keep damaging further, whatever it is, emotions, stress response, hormonal issues.
Right. My clients are, Well, what are we going to do? How are we going to change? Listen, I'm not your oncologist. We're not changing anything. I'm your coach. So
Yeah.
we're going to keep doing the same things that we were going to do prior
Yeah.
to. Same thing.
Exactly. Have you seen a couple of the studies that have been coming out on CBD for COVID?
Yeah, I have.
But there's some good ones coming out right now. But it's all back down to the train again. It's all about essential fatty acid and vitamin D synthesis. So if you have low vitamin D3, guess what? Your endocannabinoid system isn't working. It's there, you know. So he's doing a couple of big lectures. He's going to be doing a cool lecture with ONI, the Oncology Nutrition Institute, Institute, on cannabis, endocannabinoid system, fatty acid synthesis, and vitamin D. So it's all about the nutrient base of helping CBD work better for patients. People are like, I don't feel anything on it. Well, guess what? You probably have no endocannabinoid tone because you're malnourished.
Right. Is he getting into genetic testing with that too? Yeah. Okay.
He's going to be doing the epigenetics around it as well. So yeah, so that's coming up. I think he's up next month. I can't remember if it's end of June or early July. He's doing that class. And then I just did a class for her on analyzing the CBC, the complete CBC, just specific to the immune system, how timely. I think I did it in February.
Yeah.
And then all this hit. So that's on her site too. So I go into the whole thing, which is really funny in the timing.
Whose
and then
site?
It's ONI, Oncology Nutrition Institute. So that's pretty cool. And then I'm going to do another one in the fall on the metabolic panel, like how to really test, assess, address with that. And then I'll do another one later part of fall on my trifecta, the CRP, CRP, LDH, and SED rate, because people can use, I want people to start to really understand that don't believe what I'm telling you or what Steph's telling you or my naturopathic colleague over here or this oncologist over there. Do your own due diligence, do your own in labs, test it. You now have can listen to me on how to assess it. And then you realize what you got going on. Then you go back to your provider and say, you missed this, 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 and this. What are we going to do about it? Empowerment.
Oh, nothing? Okay. It's time for another player on the team.
Thanks for watching the Theta Living Show. Please like and subscribe to our channel to learn more about cancer and cannabis, 2 things you need to know about.